Damaged Defenders by Scherza. Chapter 52. Loki, Thor, and Soldier. The first Loki knew of trouble in the tower was when Jarvis spoke up, pulling him out of the book he'd been reading. Mr. Ferguson, an assassination attempt via sniper has been perpetrated, aimed at the floor where Agents Coulson, Barton, and Romanov are currently. The probable location of the sniper has been ascertained, and Agent Coulson is inquiring as to whether or not you can take someone with you when you teleport. Of course, Loki said. He'd come remarkably close to leaping to his feet the moment assassination had escaped Jarvis's speakers. Though he hadn't quite rushed to such a degree, he'd been on his feet remarkably quickly, and had immediately called his armor from the magical pocket where he stored it. Even had Coulson not planned for him to at least act as transport for whoever was being sent to capture the would-be assassin, Loki would have armored up and gone to deal with the offender. He asks that you take Thor with you to Trump Tower. It is presumed the sniper is on the top floor. They will have at least one person with them, possibly more. I have alerted Thor, and he indicates he is ready when you are. He is in his rooms. Loki nodded, but didn't waste time verbally acknowledging Jarvis. He just teleported to Thor's floor. Thor, as Jarvis had indicated, was armored up with Mjolnir in hand, scowling ferociously. Loki, again, didn't bother with words. He just grabbed Thor's arm and teleported them both. While Thor and Loki had long worked with Sif and the Three, they had also worked rather extensively with just the two of them, both as children and as adults. As a result, they were very, very familiar with each other's capabilities and used to working together as a team. At least of sorts. Of course, that had been back when Thor had been a bull-headed idiot. These days, he at least tried to use his head. Thus, when they landed, Loki got a bit of a pleasant surprise. Thor didn't instantly hair off to pummel someone into mush.
Brother, can you locate our prey?
Thor asked, almost whispering in an attempt to keep his voice down. Loki cocked an eyebrow in surprise, but then nodded, spitting out a threat of magic as he tried to pinpoint anyone that was at the place. He frowned when he only picked up on one person. Where was the sniper's backup? Agent Coulson had specified that there would be someone, and the agent would not give deliberately erroneous information. Loki's immediate suspicion was that they were magically masked. That was going to make things interesting. I believe the sniper is there, Loki said, pointing to one of the apartments. The sniper had not yet left the area. Their reaction had been too fast for that. Less than a minute had passed between the shot being taken and Loki and Thor's arrival. No human Loki was aware of could get out of an area that fast. At least not without leaving ample evidence behind, at any rate. The backup I cannot locate. I think they may have masked themselves magically. I shall attempt to locate them and take them out while you detain the sniper. Thor nodded and stormed towards the apartment, expression grim and forbidding. Loki watched him go in stunned disbelief. Not so long ago, Thor would have argued, questioning Loki's competence to make such a decision, call the plan cowardly and not befitting of true warriors, and or question Loki's ability to do as he'd claimed. After half a second, he shook off the surprise and got to work trying to find the backup. They'd be here somewhere. If the circumstances had been different, Thor would have been both pleased and saddened by the effect his decision to actually listen to Loki and follow his lead when he came up with a plan had on his brother. He would also have mentally cursed Odin up one side and down the other for bringing them to this pass with his manipulations and general assholery. Though Thor didn't know assholery is a word yet. He'd also probably curse himself up one side and down the other for being an idiot in the past. That said, the situation was what it was, and Thor had something far more important to concentrate on than mentally kicking Odin and himself around the 9 realms. Someone had tried to kill one or more of the Avengers. That was not something that could go unchallenged. The would-be assassin was about to learn just how much of a bad idea it was to mug around with an Avenger. Or at least that was Thor's plan, anyway. Thor didn't know it, but he was in for one hell of a fight against a very challenging opponent. He almost didn't make it through the door of the apartment at all. The only thing that saved him was that as good as the soldier was, he could not compensate for Asgardian armor. Mostly because no one on Earth had any idea what it was made of or how durable it was, so the soldiers' controllers could not inform him of the best weaponry to get through it. Thus, the bullet that came crashing through the door as Thor approached it smashed into his breastplate directly over his heart, but did not get through his armor. Thor staggered half a step back, more out of surprise than anything else. Then he glowered and flung Mjolnir through the door, following swiftly behind it. He almost got clotheslined by a metal arm before he was even clear of the door's debris. The only thing that saved him was that the soldier didn't know who was coming through the door. He had thus slightly misjudged the height to aim at, hitting Thor right about at clavicle height instead of directly across the throat. As it was, the hit was hard enough to stagger Thor. Whoever this sniper was, it swiftly became clear that he was, well, more than just a sniper. He was also a ruthless hand-to-hand combatant. Thor found himself targeted by a withering assault of swift, brutal strikes from the metal arm, which proved to be far stronger than Thor had discovered to be Midgardian norm thus far. It was also, due to being metal, far more durable than a flesh arm. Disconcertingly, it was proving to be more durable than most Midgardian metals Thor had encountered thus far as well. As nasty as the attacks from that quarter were, Thor would have managed well enough if that had been the end of it. But it was not. While the metal arm was busy hammering at him, the other hand wielded a knife against him with such skill that only the fact Thor had grown up and sparred with Loki, who had a remarkable skill with knives, saved him from debilitating injuries. Debilitating even for an Asgardian, because this sniper was finding the weak points and gaps in Thor's armor with disconcerting ease and efficiency. Thor was forced to allow that knife to find flesh more than once, in exchange for it not getting plunged into such a weak spot and doing far more damage than a surface cut on his arm would do. To make matters worse, Thor had no real way of predicting what this man would do next. Most beings, when they fought, had some sort of tell that gave away what they were going to do next. This man had no physical tells that Thor could discern. If he had facial tells, Thor could not discern them either, because the man was wearing an odd mask that covered almost his entire face, save for a small strip of his forehead. Thor knew he could end the battle by calling Mjolnir to his hand. He was, however, reluctant to kill the sniper. If he did so, they would lose any information the sniper possessed, and Thor wanted to know why the man had tried to kill an Avenger. He was quite sure the rest of the team would like the answer to that question as well. Loki was not the epic emperor. He could find no trace, magically or otherwise, of a backup team for the sniper. It engendered far too many questions in Loki's agile and rather paranoid mind. Finally giving up on finding the backup, Loki headed into the apartment to back Thor up as he could hear Thor still wrangling with a would-be assassin. Honestly, he was surprised no one had shown up wondering what in the world was going on. The fight was not exactly quiet. When Loki walked into the apartment, half the place was trashed, thanks to the two men throwing each other around and crashing into things. He made a mental note to see to it that everything was repaired. Loki was more than a little surprised when he followed the trail of destruction into the kitchen. The fight was, well, as equal as Loki had seen a fight be thus far between Thor and anyone of Earth. Even Captain Rogers hadn't managed to keep things this equal, though that was perhaps because he and Thor had been involved in friendly spars, and the captain was thus not going all out the way this sniper was. Enough was enough. Thor clearly had a fairly good idea what Loki wanted because he abruptly flung himself aside. The moment Thor was clear, Loki flung a spell at the sniper, flattening him against the wall and securing him, body and limbs, in a web of magic.
Have a care for the metal arm, brother. It is far stronger than the flesh one,
Thor warned. Loki nodded and adjusted the spell accordingly. Probably a good thing, as the sniper wasn't taking being caught lying down. He was fighting the restraint spell as best he could. He wasn't getting anywhere, of course, but he was definitely giving it a try. What was disconcerting was that the sniper wasn't making a sound. Not even a grunt of effort, which, given how hard he was fighting the restraints, Loki had been expecting.
Let's get him back to Stark Tower,
Loki said. The thing about Bucky was that his world had revolved around Steve Rogers practically since the two of them had been in diapers. His loyalty to Steve was absolute. Hydra had practically had to literally rip Bucky's brain out before he'd even started to fall to their brainwashing and torture because of that. It wasn't until they gave him the news of Steve's death and kept hammering it in that Steve was dead that Bucky's resistance finally collapsed. Even then, Hydra shot themselves in the foot because by wiping Bucky's memory, they prevented him from remembering that Steve was dead. And as long as Bucky didn't remember that little factoid, the shards of the man he'd been prior to their brainwashing kept fighting. The end result was that the programming lasted, at best, 4 or 5 days before it started breaking down. And the best case scenario included 0 exposure to anything that would trigger Bucky's memories, especially any that included or would bring up associations with Steve. Given that one such association was Hydra itself, there had only been 1 or 2 times that the soldier had actually lasted 4 or 5 days before he started acting odd. Over time, thanks to memory wipes that weren't as thorough as they should have been, for whatever reason, other triggers had pulled the shards of Bucky to the surface, or tried to anyway, were added. Black widows and red-haired females of any age, but especially children, being the biggest. Of course, this only did the soldier any good when no one realized he was starting to remember, starting to fight the programming, which meant that over time he'd slowly gotten more sneaky about his rebellions. Hydra had mistaken the growing lack of violence when the soldiers' programming started breaking down for their programming finally slowly beginning to stick. It encouraged them to get a little lazy and complacent. Especially the programming teams that didn't work on the soldier regularly, and thus were less familiar with the shenanigans he got up to as he started fighting the programming. That meant that Hydra was increasingly likely to both let the soldier go longer between mind wipes and to not wipe him as thoroughly as was really required to get rid of recently acquired memories and suppress the odd triggers once more. And Hydra had sent the soldier into a situation guaranteed to bring Bucky to the surface in 3 seconds flat. They'd sent him after Tony Stark, whose last name alone was a trigger for Steve-related memories, and who looked enough like his father to make matters worse. They sent him after Natasha, the Black Widow he'd trained and managed to corrupt to the point where she fought her way free of Hydra control. And worst of all, they sent him after Steve. And the situation was compounded by the fact that the soldier was now under the authority of a second-string programming team, which meant he wasn't getting reprogrammed as thoroughly as would be necessary to suppress the triggers he was being exposed to. The general plan to deal with the Avengers had not been the soldiers. He did not plan to strategize. He did as he was ordered, and that was the end of it. So the planning had been up to Hydra goons and Yelena. Yelena had recognized the futility of trying to disguise herself and worm her way into the Avengers' lives. Her fellow widow would splat her in next to no time. Certainly long before she could neutralize any of the Avengers. While sniping some of them was certainly a viable possibility, it was not viable for others. The Wolverine, at least, was completely immune to death by bullets, and there was no way of knowing for certain if the 2 aliens were vulnerable to bullets. Shooting at them, only to find out they were immune, had been deemed unwise in the extreme. Yelena was wise enough to realize that killing only 1 or 2 of the Avengers would bring the remaining Avengers down on the assassin like a ton of bricks, making killing them all the harder. No, killing the Avengers called for an up-close and personal touch, so that all of them could be killed at the same time, which meant getting both herself and the soldier into striking range. So Yelena had commanded the soldier to shoot at the tower, knowing full well that the Avengers would react immediately to capture a would-be assassin. So while the soldier was doing his part, Yelena was sneaking into the tower. Or well, so she thought. The soldier, on the other hand, well, he took advantage of his orders. He'd been watching the Avengers for a bit over a week, despite being reprogrammed 3 times in that period. Well, it had started innocently enough, with the slow realization that he was in fact a human being, not a thing. Next had come the recognition of the fact that he was being treated differently than other people were treated. Then came flickers of memory, of a skinny blonde-haired boy and a red-haired girl, not pain, and a sense of belonging. Even stripped of any other context, at least for now, it was enough. Somewhere, somewhen, the soldier knew he had once been treated well by someone, that what his controllers did to him wasn't right. The fact that the rogue widow was a member of the Avengers, trusted by them and treated well, inclined the soldier to think that maybe they would, at worst, be kinder to him than his current controllers. Unfortunately, by the time he was forced to carry out his orders, he hadn't gotten far enough in breaking down the programming to disobey. Fortunately for him, the aliens proved to be more than a match for him, and they were bringing him to the tower. It was a chance. It was, more importantly, time away from his controllers, which he knew instinctively could only be a good thing. They couldn't reprogram him if they couldn't get to him, after all. Little did he know what sort of shitstorm his entrance into the tower was going to start.